We continue with our second thought around the topic of suffering and COVID-19. How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. She who was queen among the provinces has now become a slave. That opening verse of Lamentations seemed very apt when we were in the middle of lockdown and the streets were empty, when the sense of loss which most of us felt was very real. And while we cannot apply the national aspect of Judah and Jerusalem at that time directly to the COVID-19 pandemic, we can recognise the sense of emptiness and desolation that is presented here. Many, if not all of us, have experienced some kind of loss. This may be through close family members dying during the pandemic, jobs which have disappeared and may never return, the impossibility of seeing grandchildren and other loved ones, not being able to gather on a Sunday for our times of worship and fellowship, or simply the inability to have normal social interaction with friends. For all their benefits, Zoom, FaceTime and Skype are not quite the same as real conversations over a cup of coffee. This situation can leave us wanting to know why these things happen, or craving some sort of empathy and comfort, or waiting impatiently for a solution and for it all to come to an end. The biblical literary form of lament, though, shows us that sometimes living with the sense of loss, with the emptiness, with suffering even, is an experience that God recognises. More than this, it is an experience which God knows himself. It is significant that the Bible has one whole book dedicated to lament. It is also significant that in the collection of songs that form the heart of worship in the Bible, the Psalms, the most common of them is that of lament. For those of us who have been humanly privileged to have been born white and in the West, the language of lament has not been one which we have used often, or perhaps often even felt the need for. The fact that for a large proportion of Christians in the West life is generally reasonably comfortable seems to have led to our losing our ability to deal with suffering biblically. In other words, our theology of suffering is poor. And it is here that the biblical language of lament comes to our rescue. One of the Psalms of lament is Psalm 22. It's well known to us, not least because Jesus quotes it on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me?" This cry of Jesus on the cross is real. It is not a sham. God, in the crucified Jesus, cries out for an answer, and no answer comes. And if we fail to take this cry in all its horror and desolation, then we will forget what it meant for Jesus to be, as the old translation puts it, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. God is a God who experiences sorrow and grief, and who therefore can understand and know our pains and our sorrows. The Incarnation, among other things, teaches us that God suffers along with humanity. The Incarnation also teaches us that the answer to pain and to suffering is, as Job found out, God himself. For us, privileged to live beyond Golgotha, the person of Jesus, God incarnate, God in flesh, is where our answers have to lie. In the midst of all types of suffering, we know a God who is not uninterested, distant, unconcerned. He is God with us, Emmanuel. He is the immanent one. Perhaps it is at least in part this reality which meant that God gave us a language of lament, a language to ask the difficult questions, to cry out to him in our time of loss and suffering, to ask why and how long. That is not a sign of weakness or of doubt. It is to embrace the language that God has given us to express the realities of the human condition. And it is in the person of Jesus, the one who is the suffering servant, that we begin to see and begin to experience where hope lies in suffering.